Morning, everyone. My name is Major Jim Stanger, and my teammates are Captain Gabe Adibe, Lieutenant Josie Lynn Lenny, and Lieutenant Tyler Barker. Together, our team conducted a media assessment on the U.S. Navy's response to the COVID-19 pandemic with the USNS Comfort and USNS Mercy.
The purpose of this assessment was to understand the communication environment during the USNS missions. We did this by analyzing the prevalence of command messages versus competing messages. We analyzed about 287 online stories that contain mentions of either USNS Comfort, USNS Mercy, or both ships. We read and coded articles published within a 9-week period from March 18th to May 15th, 2020. And our analysis focused on key themes and messages, competing messages, command and media response to important events, and common voices quoted in media.
Overall coverage was neutral and factual. The USNS Comfort and Mercy commanding officers conveyed positive messages throughout. Secretary of Defense Esper's quote played a critical role in this story. Quote, relief valve, end quote. And the most commonly repeated fact about both ships was the 1,000-bed capacity. This was referenced in 45% of all articles.
As Josie mentioned, our team coded 287 independent articles during this mission. And that started from the first announcement that the ships were deploying to New York City and Los Angeles on March 18th until Mercy departed Los Angeles on May 15th. Week 3 was the most active week for published articles with 61, driven largely by Comfort's arrival in New York City on March 30th. Week 4 was the second most active, as during this week, Comfort's mission shifted to allow COVID-19 patients aboard, and both Comfort and Mercy encountered positive cases amongst the crew. The main event driving a spike in articles during week 7 was Comfort's departure from New York City on April 30th.
In the articles we analyzed, USNS Comfort was mentioned 98 times by itself, and USNS Mercy was mentioned 67 times on its own. Both ships were mentioned together 122 times during the 9-week time frame. And to be more specific, there were 62 articles that mentioned the missions during week 3 and 49 articles that mentioned the missions during week 4 and also week 7. It was during week 3 that the train engineer tried to crash into USNS Mercy, and during week 4 that the sailor aboard USNS Mercy tested positive for COVID-19. It was during week 7 that USNS Comfort left New York City. And as far as analyzing sources go, we defined physical independent sources as those offered both in online and print editions. An online independent news source was something that only had articles published online. And trade press was defined as sources that published exclusively about military issues. And lastly, wire included traditional wire sources like Associated Press. The news outlets that mission articles were most seen in were USNI News, New York Times, the Virginia Pilot, Fox News, and the Orange County Register.
We focused on 3 main themes for positive command messaging, incorporating talking points, key information, and frequently repeated phrases from military sources into 3 main themes. Displayed on your screen now is the theme that was used most frequently by the external media. Talking points such as the ships acting as a relief valve, which Gabe alluded to earlier, was repeated in 120 articles, or 42%. Also, coupled with the fact that the ships were bringing increased hospital capacity to New York and Los Angeles, which were quoted in 32% of the articles. This led to a high frequency of the theme throughout the mission. In fact, throughout the whole mission, more than 50% of all articles mentioned this theme in some form. Week 3 was the high water mark of total number of mentions with 40, while week 1 led the way with percentage mentions. Of the 13 articles released during week 1, 12 of them included a talking point in this theme. The second theme that we coded for was the Navy's support of public health. Talking points in this theme included reducing infection, screening and testing patients for COVID-19 as necessary, and the Navy's stringent cleanliness standards. External media referenced this theme the most during week 4, from April 6th through 12th, and 21 of the 50 articles during this week, or 42%, mentioned a talking point from this theme. Of note, no articles mentioned this theme at all during the week 7, which is April 27th to May 3rd. The final theme that we coded for was rapid response, and this theme was mentioned the least throughout the mission by external media. Talking points of this theme included the speed with which ships prepared to and eventually did deploy, and the fact that the ships called in medical professionals from commands and units throughout the country in short order. Media referenced this theme the most during week 6, April 20th to April 26th, and the percentage of articles with this theme were the highest during week 2, which was between March 23rd and March 29th, when 31% of the articles mentioned a talking point of rapid response.
Through our analysis, we discovered 4 important frames in media coverage. Regarding how messages permeated throughout the information environment, our research told us that with the right combination of prominence, timeliness, and quotability, a message has the potential to linger in the news cycle for an entire 9-week mission. As an example, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper held a press conference on March 17th, during which he said that sending the hospital ships would, quote, take the pressure off of civilian hospitals, end quote. This was the first known use of that terminology during the mission, and the concept of the ships acting as a relief valve was present, therefore, in 42% of all articles we coded. Another interesting frame developed throughout our research. We analyzed that the most common competing messages in coverage was that the ships were not using all the bed spaces available to them to treat patients, which occurred in 21% of stories. We began to understand why the media focused on this point so much when we recognized that 45% of all stories identified the 1,000 bed capacity of each ship as an asset. It is logical then that the media would attempt to connect those two concepts together because there is a conflict between how many beds are available and how many are reportedly being used. As professional communicators, we know that conflict is one of the most important aspects of newsworthiness. As has been highlighted already, we know that reporting on COVID-19 cases amongst the crews of the ships was a prominent competing message, occurring in 18% of stories. In response, the USNS mission was able to successfully respond with messages about the safety of the patients aboard, screening and treating for COVID as necessary, and reducing the infection. However, messages communicating that the Navy maintains stringent cleanliness standards only appeared in half as many stories. We surmise that the cleanliness message could have been woven into more media engagements. Finally, regarding how successful Navy spokespeople were at getting their message into stories, the Mercy and Comfort commanding officers were featured in 34% of all stories which contained positive messages, which is the highest of any spokesperson category. The CO of the ship is a prominent figure who is close enough to the action that reporters will often rely on them for story quotes. Again, this is another example where prominence is important. In the case of the ship CO, he or she is prominent and quotable, which is a recipe for getting our message into the story.
From our analysis, we recommend the following. Lead leaders to the camera. They're highly quotable and nearly always on message. Keep in mind that the Secretary of Defense and Chief of Naval Operations set the stage for the mission, and they set the stage by the words that they say about the mission. We can take advantage of that. In planning, pay special attention to command messages and how they can potentially be used against you. And in conclusion, commanding officers at all levels should continue to work with their PAOs to consistently convey the messages of USNS Mercy and USNS Comfort and the hope they provide. Thank you for listening to our presentation. We now will take questions.